back to the Rich Out Tech Podcast. You typing back in with your boy Dre. We already discussed what programming is, what computer science is. If you haven't seen that video, go ahead and check it out. Link right here at the top. But today we'll be talking about object-oriented programming. Some of the most popular programming languages in the world are object-oriented. These include Java, Python, C++, Javascript, and a whole lot more. So it is very important to understand these concepts of object-oriented programming. This type of programming makes it easier to maintain and upgrade your software. So just think of the iOS and all of the Apple products when you get that notification on your phone that it's time to upgrade. Apple uses OOP in order to make this process way easier. So what we're gonna do is start with a very fun and friendly beginner example using 2K, and then at the end of the video, or towards the end of the video, we'll discuss how we can use this same type of programming as we do in real life on airplanes. Look around you. What do you see? Right now I'm looking at a book. This is an object. I also have a remote. This is an object. So an object has a state and it has a behavior. What state is the object in? Well, this object is white. Has probably about 500 pages. This remote is black. Has about 8 buttons on it. That's the state. The behavior of this remote will change the channel. And what this book does is something completely different than what the remote does. So if I were to rip a page out of this book, which I wouldn't do, it would not affect anything on this controller, even though we're all in the same room. You feel me? Object-oriented programming focuses on what object we want to manipulate or change rather than how we're going to do it. So in our example, the basketball game 2K, we got different objects. We got players. And each player is an individual object as well. We got LeBron James. We would have had Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul. We got Shaquille O'Neal. Sorry, y'all, I don't watch too many sports, so the examples might not be, but you get what I'm saying. We got LeBron, we got Kobe, we got Shaq. Each one of those players are individual objects. Just like our book was an individual object, which was separate than our remote. We also got the referees. We got the jerseys on the players. We got the arenas. We got the basketball courts. We got the home court. We got the away court. We have all different objects in this game, which takes thousands of lines of code to program. So what if I wanted to change what jerseys the team has on? What if I'm in my player and I need to switch my t-shirt out to something completely different? Object-oriented programming allows the software developer to have a single point of control if he wanted to change any of these things. Now, single point of control is very helpful and useful. So say you've already programmed LeBron James to dunk, but now Shaquille O'Neal is sitting here making 95% of his three-pointers. I don't have to go in there and do anything to LeBron James' code. I don't have to change his code at all in object-oriented programming because his object is completely different from the Shaquille O'Neal object. For me to change the Shaquille O'Neal object, only thing I will have to do is go into that specific class, which we'll discuss here shortly, and go down to the player stats and pull his three-pointer percentage down. That doesn't affect anything else in the game, thanks to object-oriented programming. Single point of control. By allowing us to focus on these individual objects, not only does it allow us to have single point of control, but it also allows us to split up very large projects. So one person on the team could solely focus on LeBron James, One person on the software development team could solely focus on the basketball courts. Another person on the team could focus on the movements of the basketball object. So a basketball player, a basketball, and the actual basketball court where the players play are all objects. However, their state and behavior is different from each other. This is where we get into classes. Classes are the blueprint for creating objects. So for example, LeBron James has the capability to shoot, to dribble, to dunk. He has arms, he has legs, he has fingers. A basketball has none of those characteristics. A basketball state is completely different from the state that LeBron James has as a player. A basketball is round. A basketball has the ability to bounce. A basketball has a different color than LeBron James. So this is where we use classes as a blueprint to define the characteristics of these objects. We use these classes as a blueprint to define the state and the behavior of each object that we would like to model. So furthermore, object-oriented programming allows us to have code organization. You can have different classes for different objects in the game, as well as different behaviors of those objects in the game, and it allows us to integrate those objects together to seamlessly create the entire video game. This allows for us to separate our concerns, which makes it easier to debug and fix issues in our code. Think about something that you would like to create through code. Think of a program, for instance. Think of Instagram or Facebook. You might want to make a social media app. Think about what objects that you would need in that project. For instance, in Instagram, we have the direct message box. That's an object. We also have the stories. That's a separate object. So think of a project that you would like to create and what objects you would need to model to create that project. So simulations are huge when it comes to these type of things. Even though we're not creating the actual physical airplane, we can model every single aspect of the airplane in order to get an understanding of what would happen in certain conditions. For example, think of all the objects an airplane has. We got the wings, we got the control panel for the pilots, we got the engine, we got the fuel, we got the seats of the plane. Think of all the individual objects in the plane. Each object has its own behavior. Object-oriented programming allows us to separate these objects in classes in order to focus specifically on what the task of that object is supposed to do. Okay, so let's use the fuel as an example. The fuel tank as an individual object. The weight of the plane is a major factor in determining how long the fuel is going to last. So if we were to model the object of the fuel tank as an individual object, we can apply different outside variables and different interactions that interact with the fuel tank to determine how long the plane can stay in the air with a certain amount of passengers. So, for example, hypothetically, if we have 100 gallons of fuel, how far can we go if we have 200 passengers? So we will model the fuel tank as a class that has different parameters and different mathematical equations that determine how far and how long the plane can travel with a different amount of passengers and a different amount of weight. So we could change in our simulation, in our program, we can change the number of passengers from 100 to 50 to see how it would affect the distance that the plane can travel. Of course, we have other variables that also determine how far the plane can travel that have nothing to do with the fuel or have very little to do with the fuel. So we can model the wings of the airplane as a different and separate object. I'm not an aerospace engineer, but we can determine how capable the wings are in different flying environments, such as wind speed and storms. The wings are a separate object than the fuel tank, so in our program we made classes that modeled the wings, but we also made a class that modeled the fuel tank. Even though these objects are separate, we know that they need to interact with each other. So object-oriented programming still allows us to let these objects interact. However, if we need to change the state or the behavior of one of those individually, we can do that. Software development and computer programming is a very technical subject, but it's fun to learn, but you have to put the pieces together. So if anything was confusing in this video or felt a little bit too advanced, please go back and watch the previous videos. What is computer science? We also went over variables and data types and all of those beginner-friendly things you need to know. And if that doesn't help, please leave a comment and I'll definitely be in touch.